Life, as it unfolds, is not merely an endless chain of physical exertions, but an ongoing struggle between the will that pushes us forward and the emptiness that constantly pulls us back. When you say, "I am tired," often it is not the muscles of your body that protest, but the very core of your being, your inner flame, your spirit that feels exhausted. What modern life has failed to recognize is that fatigue is not always born of sleepless nights or hard labor. It is often born of the ceaseless demands of existence itself, of a will that chases endlessly yet finds no true fulfillment. The world confuses this spiritual exhaustion with laziness, weakness, or depression, but it is none of these. It is the burden of being alive without balance, without pause, without meaning deep enough to satisfy the endless hunger of the human soul. When you feel drained, it is because your life energy has been poured out into illusions, endless striving for approval, competition, possessions, status, and desires that never resolve. The human will, as I have observed, is a bottomless pit. Every fulfilled desire gives birth to 10 more, and thus you are trapped in a perpetual thirst. Spiritual exhaustion is the price of this trap. The body may still move, but the mind rebels and the soul quietly collapses. It is here that we must recognize the truth. The problem is not simply that you work too much or rest too little. It is that you are feeding the will endlessly without nourishing the self. ChatGPT said, "Exhaustion, in the truest sense, is not born of the body but of the spirit. The body is a simple machine. When it tires, it signals for rest, and when given rest, it recovers. But the exhaustion of the spirit is of a different nature entirely. It is not healed by a night's sleep, nor by food, nor by a brief vacation. This is because the spirit does not tire from action alone, but from the ceaseless weight of existence pressing upon it. When a man says, 'I am tired,' what he often means is not that his muscles ache, but that his very being recoils from the endless struggle of life. It is not a weariness of the flesh, but of the will. The human will is an inexhaustible force, always pushing forward, always demanding more. Yet it is this very nature that condemns man to exhaustion, because no matter how much the will achieves, it never knows rest. Each fulfilled desire births another, and so the chain extends infinitely. You might believe you are tired because you work long hours, or because the world demands much of you, but in truth, your fatigue is the result of being enslaved by this insatiable will. Your body is not broken. It is your spirit that is weary of the chase, weary of pouring itself into goals that never bring true satisfaction. Consider the modern man, running endlessly from task to task, desire to desire. He fills his days with striving, career advancement, social recognition, material accumulation. Yet when he stops, when silence surrounds him, he feels only emptiness. No amount of rest replenishes him because what has been drained is not physical energy but existential vitality. His spirit has been depleted by feeding illusions, by serving a will that can never be appeased. Sleep restores the body, but it cannot touch the exhaustion of a soul that has lived too long in conflict with itself. This is why people say, "I slept for 8 hours and still feel tired." It is not sleep they lack, it is meaning. It is not leisure they need. It is alignment with something deeper than endless desire. The exhaustion of the spirit manifests as a heaviness toward life itself, a resistance to waking, a reluctance to continue. It is not that the body cannot move forward, but that the will whispers, "What is the point?" It is a fatigue of the soul, a rebellion of the inner self against the futility of chasing shadows. True exhaustion, then, is not cured by external remedies. No drug, no entertainment, no temporary escape can fill the void, for the void belongs to the spirit. To heal such fatigue requires recognition that what drains you is not your labor, but your longing. It is the endless hunger of the will that exhausts. To see this truth is the first step toward release. For once you understand that your exhaustion is spiritual, not physical, you begin to treat it differently, not with shallow comforts, but with a deeper reorientation of life itself. ChatGPT said, The greatest torment of man lies not in what he lacks, but in the fact that he can never cease to lack. Desire is not a fleeting guest that enters and leaves the house of the soul. It is the very foundation of existence itself. The will, as Schopenhauer insists, is blind, insatiable, and endless in its striving. To live is to want, and to want is to suffer. The moment one desire is fulfilled, another immediately arises in its place, and thus man is condemned to chase endlessly, never finding the satisfaction he so desperately seeks. It is not simply that the will wants, it devours. And in this devouring, it consumes the very spirit of the one who obeys it. Think of the times when you finally obtained what you longed for. Perhaps it was wealth, recognition, love, or the attainment of some personal goal. For a brief moment, you felt the sweetness of victory, a fleeting sense of contentment, but almost immediately a new hunger appeared, larger, sharper, more demanding. The very thing that was supposed to bring peace only served as a stepping stone to another craving. Thus, man finds himself in a cycle of pursuit and disappointment, each fulfillment only deepening the abyss of longing. This is why the will is so cruel. It promises rest, but delivers only another chase. And in chasing endlessly, your spirit is drained, not because you lack energy, but because you are enslaved to a master that never sleeps. What exhausts man, therefore, is not labor itself, but the endless burden of wanting. A worker who toils hard in the field may rest at night and wake refreshed, but the man who toils under the tyranny of desire finds no rest at all. Even in his leisure, his mind is haunted by what he lacks, by what he has not yet achieved, by the gnawing sense that life is perpetually incomplete. His spirit is consumed not by action, but by anticipation. It is not the weight of the body that bows him down. It is the weight of endless longing. This insatiability of the will explains why satisfaction is always an illusion. Man is like a starving creature that mistakes shadows for food. He believes that by acquiring, by conquering, by possessing, he will find peace. Yet once he grasps what he seeks, it dissolves into emptiness, and the hunger returns. This cycle is not an accident of human life, it is its very essence. The will does not want peace, it thrives in unrest, and so every man who serves it finds himself drained, hollowed out, spiritually depleted by an appetite that cannot be fed. The recognition of this truth is painful, for it strikes at the core of human existence. To see that all striving is endless, that desire itself is the chain that binds us, is to understand why our exhaustion never fades. The spirit longs for rest, but the will never allows it. This is why you feel tired, even in moments of supposed success, because success is nothing more than a temporary pause before the will demands more. And so long as you obey it blindly, you will remain trapped in a cycle of insatiable hunger that consumes your very essence. The torment of suppressed emotions lies in their refusal to vanish simply because we ignore them. Man, in his arrogance, imagines that by concealing his pain, by forcing his grief, his anger, his longing into silence, he has conquered them. Yet, what is repressed does not disappear, it sinks deeper into the unconscious, where it festers, gathering strength, and emerges later in distorted and destructive forms. To suppress is not to overcome, but to postpone, and every postponement increases the burden upon the spirit until it collapses under the weight of its own denial. Consider the man who believes he is strong because he never weeps. He silences his sorrow, pretends it does not exist, and carries on with a mask of composure. Outwardly he appears unshaken, but inwardly the sorrow mutates into anxiety, into restlessness, into an exhaustion he cannot explain. What he believed he had buried was not dead but alive, gnawing at his vitality, draining his strength from within. The spirit pays dearly for every feeling it is forced to suppress, for emotions are not illusions. They are the cries of the will itself. And to silence them is to silence a part of one's being, leaving behind only a fragment of the self to stumble through existence. The suppressed emotion does not remain what it once was. Anger buried becomes bitterness, grief denied becomes numbness, fear silenced becomes perpetual unease. The unconscious does not forget. It stores every unacknowledged truth, every unspoken word, every feeling denied expression. And from the depths of this hidden storehouse, the emotions exert their power indirectly, emerging as chronic fatigue, as despair without cause, as anxiety that clings to the soul like a shadow without form. Thus, the man who suppresses what he feels discovers that his very life force is diminished, that he walks through life not awake but half alive, drained by the energy required to hold back what seeks release. It is a grave mistake to assume that suppression is strength. True strength lies in facing what is, in enduring the storm of one's emotions rather than damming them up until they overflow in chaos. The man who refuses to confront his inner pain does not escape it. He only ensures that it returns in disguise more destructive than before. And this hidden struggle, this constant war against one's own inner truth, is what exhausts the soul. It is not merely the presence of pain that drains us, but the refusal to allow it to be felt. The one who suppresses his emotions becomes divided against himself, split between what he shows the world and what he secretly endures. This division is the very definition of spiritual exhaustion, for it demands constant vigilance, endless self-deception, and the maintenance of a mask that grows heavier with each passing day. To suppress is to deny one's own humanity, and in this denial, the soul withers. Thus, the emptiness and anxiety you feel are not accidents. They are the inevitable price of refusing to acknowledge the truth within you. Detachment from the inner self is the quiet poison of existence. Man believes he can live outwardly, consumed by tasks, pleasures, ambitions, and distractions, without turning inward to face the depths of his being. He convinces himself that fulfillment is found in the external world, in possessions, in recognition, in fleeting excitements. Yet all the while he drifts further from the only source of true vitality, his inner self. The result of this detachment is not peace nor freedom, but despair. For the one who abandons the voice within becomes hollow, no longer guided by his own essence, but enslaved to forces outside of him. The inner self is not a mere ornament of existence, something optional to engage with in moments of leisure. It is the very root of who we are. To neglect it is like cutting a tree from its roots and expecting it to remain alive. Outwardly, the tree may appear to stand for a time, but inwardly it is decaying, starving, losing its life force. In the same way, a man who ignores his inner life may still smile, still speak, still function in the world, but within, the soul grows weaker. This weakness does not always manifest immediately, but eventually it reveals itself as despair, as emptiness, as the quiet sense that life has no meaning. The tragedy of this detachment is that it is often chosen in the name of comfort. To confront the inner self requires courage, for within lie not only light and creativity, but also darkness, wounds, and unhealed pain. Many would rather escape into noise than listen to the silence where the truth of their being waits. They immerse themselves in endless work, in entertainment, in superficial connections, hoping these will fill the void. But nothing external can substitute for the neglected inner life. The despair they feel is not caused by the absence of pleasure or achievement, but by the absence of connection to their own essence. This despair is subtle. It is not always expressed in tears or dramatic breakdowns. It is felt as a fatigue that lingers even when one is rested, as a disinterest in what once brought joy, as a vague unease that clings to every moment. It is the soul's quiet protest against being ignored. The man detached from his inner self becomes like a stranger to his own life, going through the motions without truly living. He mistakes busyness for purpose, distraction for peace, and routine for stability, but in the stillness, when all distractions fade, he cannot escape the weight of his despair. To detach from the inner self is to betray the only companion that remains constant through life, oneself. Friends may leave, wealth may fade, Achievements may be forgotten, but the inner self remains. If ignored, it becomes a tormentor. If embraced, it becomes a guide. The despair of detachment is nothing other than the call of the self to be remembered, to be faced, to be integrated. Only when one turns inward can the silence of despair transform into the richness of meaning. Attachment to illusions of control is one of the deepest sources of suffering. Man convinces himself that he can master life, bend it to his will, and secure himself against the unpredictable storms of existence. He clings to plans, to systems, to routines, believing that if he holds tightly enough, nothing will escape him. Yet life is not a servant to human will. It is vast, untamable, indifferent. The harder one tries to impose control, the more violently reality resists. The exhaustion that follows is not simply physical, it is spiritual, for the will expends itself in a battle it cannot win. What remains is despair, born of the endless collision between human desire and the indifference of the world. This illusion of control springs from fear. The human being cannot tolerate uncertainty, so he invents the belief that he can conquer it through planning, through prediction, through endless vigilance. But this vigilance becomes a prison. The man who clings to control is never at rest, for he is always preparing, always guarding, always anticipating what could go wrong. Even when life offers him moments of calm, he cannot enjoy them, for he fears what lies beyond the horizon. He becomes chained to his own expectations, unable to surrender to the flow of life. In trying to master existence, he becomes its slave. The world, however, exposes this illusion at every turn. A sudden illness, a betrayal, an accident, the inevitability of death. These forces remind man that he governs far less than he believes. Instead of finding peace in this truth, he fights against it, and this rebellion drains him. He forgets that control was never his to begin with, that life is shaped as much by chaos as by order, as much by fate as by effort. His despair is the despair of the puppet who believes he is the puppeteer. This is why spiritual exhaustion arises so often in those who pursue control. They measure their worth by how well they can command life, and when life does not obey, they feel broken. Their identity crumbles because it was built upon an illusion. They mistake failure of control for failure of self, but the truth is that the self was never meant to dominate life. It was meant to live within it, to adapt, to experience, to grow. By clinging to control, man denies himself the very essence of existence, its unpredictability, its mystery, its constant movement. Letting go of control does not mean collapsing into passivity. It means recognizing the limits of human will and finding strength within those limits. It means distinguishing between what can be shaped and what must be accepted, between effort and surrender. The one who releases the illusion of control does not weaken, he becomes free. He ceases to fight against the nature of existence and instead learns to walk with it. In doing so, the despair born of illusion gives way to a deeper peace, not because life has become easier, but because he no longer wastes his soul resisting the inevitable. ChatGPT said, "Comparison and envy are poisons that slowly drain the human spirit." At the heart of envy lies the false belief that the value of one's life can be measured only against the lives of others. Instead of standing within himself and facing the raw reality of his own existence, man gazes outward, counting what others possess, how others are seen, how others are loved. This constant comparison is a form of slavery, for it places one's worth in the hands of strangers. It makes the soul dependent upon shadows, and in doing so, it suffocates it. The exhaustion of comparison is not merely mental, but profoundly spiritual. Every glance at another's life becomes a judgment upon one's own. The mind whispers, they are happier, richer, more successful, more admired, and so the individual is consumed not with living his own life, but with endlessly tallying the supposed victories of others. This endless arithmetic leaves no space for peace. It is a hunger that cannot be fed, for no matter how far one goes, there will always be someone who appears to stand higher. Thus, the individual runs in circles, trapped in an arena where the race never ends and the prize never comes. Envy is corrosive because it turns life into a battlefield of appearances. What is envied is rarely the truth of another's life. It is the image they project, the surface that conceals their struggles, their loneliness, their despair. Yet man does not envy reality, he envies illusions. He sacrifices his peace to compete with phantoms, unaware that even if he attained what he desires, the satisfaction would vanish quickly, replaced by new envy. For envy is not about possession, it is about comparison. Its hunger never ceases because its object always shifts. This is why envy is so spiritually draining. It creates a life lived outwardly, never inwardly. It turns man away from the question of his own becoming and locks him into imitation. Instead of asking, "What is true for me? What path calls to me?" he asks, "How do I measure against them?" And so his will is weakened, his individuality diluted, his essence wasted. The envy-driven man becomes a shadow chasing shadows, and in that chase, his soul is left hollow. The cure for envy is not in acquiring more, but in seeing through the illusion itself. One must awaken to the futility of comparison, to the truth that every human being carries unseen burdens and unseen struggles. To envy is to desire a mask, never the reality behind it. By turning inward, by grounding oneself in one's own values, one begins to break the chains of comparison. In this act of self-anchoring, the spiritual exhaustion caused by envy dissolves. For Schopenhauer, life already demands much suffering. It is difficult enough to endure one's own lot. To add to this weight, the torment of envying others is to multiply pain needlessly. By freeing oneself from comparison, one frees energy for what truly matters, living authentically, facing life as it is, and shaping one's existence without the burden of shadows. Endless striving is the great illusion that deceives the human spirit into believing that peace lies just beyond the next achievement, the next possession, the next recognition. Man convinces himself that if he can only reach a certain height, of wealth, of status, of success, then at last the gnawing emptiness within him will be stilled. Yet the tragedy is that the very moment he grasps what he longed for, the satisfaction evaporates like smoke, leaving behind the same hunger, now directed at a new object. This cycle is not accidental, but intrinsic to desire itself. For desire, as Schopenhauer understood, is not meant to be fulfilled. It is meant to perpetuate itself. The spirit is drained by this ceaseless chase because it is never allowed to rest in what is. Man is not permitted to dwell in the present moment, for the present is never enough. His eyes are always fixed upon the horizon, upon what has not yet come. He is like a traveler who, upon reaching a mountain peak, feels no joy, for his gaze is already upon the next peak in the distance. And so, life becomes an endless march, where each arrival is not a homecoming, but merely a pause before further pursuit. This is why striving without end leads not to fulfillment, but to exhaustion, to a sense that one's very existence is slipping away without ever being lived. In the modern world, this disease of striving has become the common condition. People measure themselves by accomplishments, by social recognition, by the endless accumulation of objects, each one promising to silence the restlessness of the soul. But the more they achieve, the more restless they become, for achievement feeds ambition, and ambition knows no end. The man who once dreamed of bread to survive now dreams of luxuries to impress. The man who longed for security now longs for endless expansion. This shifting of the goalposts ensures that peace is always deferred, never attained. Spiritually, this creates a devastating hollowness. For what is life if it is always lived for a future that never arrives? To live only in striving is to live always outside oneself, always in pursuit of what is not yet real, and thus never grounded in what is. The self becomes like a ghost, forever leaning forward, forever unable to inhabit the present moment with fullness. This is why, despite apparent progress, despite wealth and recognition, so many feel weary, empty, and dissatisfied. Their lives are consumed by striving, but striving itself consumes them. The futility of endless striving can only be seen when one dares to stop and reflect. To ask, what am I running toward, and when I arrive, will I truly be at peace? The answer, for most, is sobering. Peace is never found at the end of striving, for striving breeds more striving. The way to strength lies not in accumulating more, but in stepping outside of this vicious cycle, in recognizing that life is not a ladder to be climbed, but a reality to be faced directly. Only when the illusion of more collapses does the spirit begin to regain its strength, freed from the exhaustion of chasing shadows across an endless horizon.